The Louisiana air was thick with heat, the sweet smell of barbecue, and the pungent aroma of manure. Locals cheered and packed the bleachers with their eyes fixed on an arena full of bulls, cowboys, calves, and inmates. Good old Southern entertainment was in full swing. But something else was in the air. A storm was brewing, and I could feel it in my soul. Atop a jet black steed, Whipsaw, cowboy, sat in a chute gripping leather and rawhide. Old folk dubbed him Whipsaw so long ago that I don't think he even knew what his given name was anymore. Whipsaw was the fastest Bronco buster ever to walk this side of the earth. Having witnessed his prowess, I can attest to that without exaggeration. But despite his artistry, he was convicted and sentenced to spend the rest of his days at Angora Penitentiary. Truth be told, it was that same expertise that landed him in Angora in the first place. Now, it didn't matter to the law in Parish County that on the day of his arrest, Whipsaw was seen way across town. Police claimed they picked him up long after sunset, after the warning sirens stopped blaring. But we all knew the truth. Warden Blake didn't just want Whipsaw, he needed him. You see, to participate in Angora's annual rodeo, you had to be an inmate. And so, Whipsaw became a penitentiary resident, a tactical move, if you will, by Warden Blake. I wasn't surprised. It's what landed me here in Angora a few years prior to Whipsaw. To hear Warden Blake tell it, any inmate chosen for my team is lucky. His words were filled with ambition and greed. Why, it's a privilege to be a part of the wildest ride. Besides, it lets our inmates make a little money, find redemption, and get a glimpse of freedom, no matter how fleeting it may be. Funny thing was, none of us felt lucky, and we all knew that rehabilitation and freedom were the last things on his mind. Warden Blake was driven by power, and in Parish County, power doesn't exist without money. At least, not within the circles in which he ran. Whipsaw was processed into the system. I wouldn't lay eyes on him again for over 1,000 days. You see, he declined Warden Blake's invitation to be a part of the road, and as a result, he spent 3 years in solitary confinement as punishment. But somehow, this year, this year, word had gotten back to him about the black horse named Shade. To this day, I have no idea what changed his mind, but Whipsaw agreed to join the wildest ride. Well, it wasn't by mistake that I was assigned to be his pickup rider. Warden Blake was a calculating man. He figured it would make Whipsaw more compliant if he had someone to connect with, someone like a family member. My name is Vance, and I am Whipsaw's uncle. Guess you could say this was our generational curse. I was in the chute with him and tried to warn Whipsaw. I told you something ain't right with this Mustang. Must be inbred, unnatural. My nephew half smiled at me, looked at the Bronco, and chalked the rumors of Shade up as prison talk. He turned to me and said, maybe he ain't supposed to be here, just like us. He swung up on that beast like a fish takes to water and looked down on me with resolve. He wasn't just riding for himself, he was riding for all of us. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that crawled up my spine. That's when Warden Blake sidled up against the chute and shouted, Whipsaw, you're up. Anything less than 6 seconds, and it's back to solitary confinement for you. Whipsaw shook his head in agreement, but there was something I knew that he didn't. I'd been in Angora longer, and I told him, this ain't my first rodeo. I've seen what happens to other riders when they don't win. They lose their usefulness, and a useless inmate is a missing one. Unfortunately, my nephew was not a man in the mood for reasoning. He was on a mission. His voice steady and filled with defiance, he turned to me and said, win or lose, if I stay here, I'm dead anyway. I recognized the look in his eye. It was the same look I had back in the day when my knees and spine had more cushion. He had the look of a man with nothing to lose. 6 seconds. That was the time to be, and that's all he had on his mind. Whipsaw took a firm hold of the reins and nodded to me when he was ready. In that moment, I saw a glint of hope in his eyes. I didn't know which one of them would break first, but if I was a betting man, I'd say Shane had the shorter end of the stick. Whipsaw nodded, and I raised my arm up in the air, signaling to start the show. The rodeo announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Shade! The meanest buck to ever be corralled. No rider, inmate or freeman, has ever survived more than 6 seconds. Let's see if this boy has got what it takes. The crowd roared. I opened the gate. The black steed exploded into the center ring, twisting and thrashing wildly, desperate to rid itself of the burden on its back. But Whipsaw wouldn't turn him loose. He whispered into his ear, "You got fire lit inside you, same as me, don't you?" Shade snorted as if he understood, and a mist of fuming air shot from his nostrils. The radio announcer yelled, 2 seconds. The crowd watched with bated breath. 4 seconds. The crowd hooted and hollered. They were in a frenzy. 6 seconds. 8 seconds. Warden Blake shouted, "That purse is mine. Ride that horse, boy." And that's when it happened. Whipsaw pulled on the reins and whispered, "Together and free." Shade's body bent like no beast should. The radio announcer yelled, 10 seconds. Whipsaw ordered, "Let's go." Shade rose on its hind legs, whined out something unearthly, and then came down so hard that the ground beneath them shook within the entire arena. That sweet smell of barbecue and manure turned to sulfur. The sun sank, everything went dark, the crowd went silent, and then Shade moved. The dirt beneath his hooves parted like the Red Sea as Whipsaw steered Shade toward the stands. The crowd gasped with fear as he galloped straight toward them. The announcer mumbled, "Oh my God." Warden Blake went pale and scrambled for an exit but wasn't fast enough. He felt a pull. Shade had the warden by the scruff of the neck and was dragging him back. The warden's hand reached out, wrenched, and grabbed onto a rail, but the beast was too strong. Possessed with thoughts of freedom, it tugged and pulled at the warden until they were all in the center ring. Finally, the black Bronco stopped and spit Warden Blake to the ground. The earth opened and swallowed him whole. In a poof of smoke, Whipsaw and Shade disappeared, and in the blink of an eye, the ground smoothed itself like nothing had happened. None of us knew if Whipsaw and Shade were above or below ground. We just knew that they were both free. Save for a few guards and inmates in the arena, it was empty. They walked with their trusty clipboards, checking off names, making sure none of us had escaped. And that's when somebody yelled out, "Whipsaw!" Rehabilitated, those guards took off running. From that day forward, we were treated a lot differently after Whipsaw's wildest ride. And although we don't talk about him much, the legend of Whipsaw and Shade lives on.